Welcome. Today, we uncover 5 chilling Russian horror stories that will haunt you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more terrifying tales. Let's dive in. It was nearly midnight when Sergei boarded the last metro train at the Chistye Prudy station. The platform was eerily empty, the usual hum of commuters replaced by an unsettling silence. Sergei was headed home after a long shift, his eyes heavy and his mind numb. As the train sped through the dark tunnels, he noticed something strange. No station announcements, no stops, just an endless stretch of blackness outside the window. Frowning, Sergei checked his phone, but there was no signal. His fellow passengers were few, their faces obscured by shadows. One woman clutched a briefcase tightly, her knuckles white. An elderly man stared blankly ahead. A child sat motionless, her wide eyes fixed on Sergei. Suddenly, the train screeched to a halt in a dimly lit tunnel. The doors slid open, revealing a platform Sergei didn't recognize. Faded Soviet propaganda posters adorned the walls, and a flickering sign read, Line 13. Confused, Sergei stepped off, only to hear the doors hiss shut behind him. The train sped away, leaving him alone. The air was cold, and the dim light cast long, distorted shadows. Sergei approached a rusted bench, its surface etched with strange symbols. His unease grew as he noticed something chilling. His reflection in the glass of an old, broken vending machine didn't match his movements. Then came a sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping echoing from the dark end of the platform. It grew louder, closer. Sergei called out, his voice trembling, but the only response was the tap, 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 steady as a heartbeat. He turned toward the tunnel, squinting into the darkness, when a chilling voice whispered from behind him. "Welcome back, Sergei. We've been waiting." Cliffhanger. Sergei spun around, but the platform was empty. The tapping had stopped, replaced by the sound of faint, ghostly laughter. Sergei's breath came in short, ragged bursts as he scanned the empty platform. The voice, the laughter, it all seemed to come from nowhere, yet everywhere at once. His reflection in the vending machine remained still, its blank eyes staring back as though mocking him. Trying to calm his nerves, he walked toward the end of the platform where the tapping had come from. His footsteps echoed unnaturally, each step sounding heavier than the last. The dim light flickered, casting warped shadows that seemed to twist and move on their own. A low, rumbling sound broke the silence. Sergei turned to see headlights piercing the tunnel's darkness. Another train was approaching, its speed unnervingly slow. As it emerged, its exterior looked ancient, dented and covered in grime, with cracked windows and rusted doors. The number 13 glowed faintly on the front. The train screeched to a halt, and the doors slid open with a groan. The interior was dimly lit, filled with passengers sitting unnaturally still, their heads bowed as though asleep, or worse. Sergei hesitated, but something compelled him to step inside. The moment he crossed the threshold, the doors slammed shut behind him. He moved cautiously down the aisle, his footsteps muffled by the worn, tattered carpet. The passengers remained motionless, their faces obscured. Then, as he passed a man in a long coat, the figure's head snapped up. The man's eyes were hollow, his lips pulled into a grotesque grin. "You can't leave now," he rasped. "Not after you've boarded." Panicking, Sergei bolted toward the next car, but the further he went, the stranger the train became. Each compartment was different, one filled with eerie children's toys, another with rusted blood-stained tools. The train jolted violently, and Sergei lost his balance, crashing into a seat. Outside, the windows no longer showed dark tunnels, but distorted, swirling images of Moscow. Familiar landmarks twisted into nightmarish versions of themselves. Cliffhanger. The lights flickered, and when they came back on, every passenger's head was turned toward Sergei, their hollow eyes unblinking. Sergei froze, his heart pounding as dozens of hollow eyes bore into him. The train swayed gently, but the passengers remained motionless, their grotesque faces fixed in his direction. "Who are you?" Sergei shouted, his voice cracking. No answer, only the faint hum of the train. He backed away slowly, his hand brushing against the cold metal of the door to the next car. The instant he touched it, the passengers stood in unison, their movements stiff and jerky. The air grew heavy, and and Sergei's skin prickled with cold. A low, guttural whisper echoed through the car. "You don't belong here. Yet." Panicked, he yanked the door open and stumbled into the next compartment, slamming it shut behind him. This car was darker, the flickering lights casting strange shadows that seemed to crawl across the walls. Unlike the previous compartments, this one was empty, save for a single figure sitting at the far end, cloaked in shadow. The figure didn't move, but Sergei could feel its gaze piercing through the darkness. He approached cautiously, his steps slow and deliberate. As he drew closer, he noticed the figure held a cracked, ancient pocket watch in its hand. "It's not time," the figure murmured, its voice low and chilling. "But it will be soon." The figure looked up, revealing a face eerily familiar. His own, but older, worn, and haunted. Sergei stumbled back, his mind spinning. What is this?" he whispered. The doppelganger smiled, its expression twisted. "This is where the lost come to forget, and where the forgotten come to stay." Before Sergei could respond, the train screeched to a halt, throwing him to the floor. He scrambled to his feet and looked out the window. The station outside was vast and dimly lit, with signs in a language he couldn't recognize. Shadows moved along the walls, too fast and fluid to be human. Cliffhanger. The door behind him creaked open, and Sergei felt a cold hand clamp onto his shoulder as the whispering voice said, "Welcome to the terminal of the lost." Sergei spun around, but no one was there. The icy grip lingered on his shoulder, sending chills down his spine. The train's doors slid open with a metallic groan, revealing the sprawling, eerie platform of the terminal of the lost. The station seemed endless, its ceiling shrouded in darkness, while strange, flickering lights barely illuminated the ground. Faint, distorted announcements played over ancient speakers, their words unintelligible. Shadows slithered along the walls, disappearing when Sergei tried to focus on them. He hesitated, but the voice from behind urged him forward. "You can't go back now." With no other choice, Sergei stepped onto the platform. The cold air was suffocating, and the ground beneath him seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. As he moved cautiously forward, he noticed dozens of abandoned belongings scattered across the floor. Suitcases, coats, and even toys, as if their owners had vanished in an instant. A faint sobbing sound echoed from one of the tunnels branching off the platform. Sergei approached, his nerves taut, and found a young girl sitting on the ground, her face buried in her hands. "Hey, are you okay?" Sergei asked, his voice trembling. The girl lifted her head, revealing a pale, tear-streaked face. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "He's always watching." Before Sergei could ask who, the shadows around them began to shift, forming a towering, grotesque figure with empty sockets where its eyes should have been. The girl screamed, and the figure lunged, its shadowy limbs stretching toward them. Sergei grabbed the girl's hand and ran, the platform stretching endlessly before him. He could hear the shadow pursuing them, its guttural growls and the scraping of unseen claws echoing all around. Finally, they reached a set of old, rusted stairs leading to the surface. Sergei pushed the girl up ahead of him, but as he climbed, the steps seemed to dissolve beneath his feet, leaving him dangling over a dark, swirling void. Cliffhanger. The girl looked down at Sergei, her voice eerily calm now. "You can't escape the metro. No one ever does." Sergei's grip slipped as the rusted stairs disintegrated beneath him. He dangled over the dark void, the shadowy figure's guttural growls closing in from below. Desperate, he clawed his way up, fueled by pure adrenaline. The girl watched him with an unsettling calm, her earlier fear replaced by something cold and knowing. As Sergei hauled himself onto the platform, he gasped. "What do you mean no one escapes?" She tilted her head, her voice almost mechanical. "The metro has its own rules. You think you're running, but you're only going deeper." Before Sergei could respond, the platform around them began to warp. The flickering lights stretched and distorted, and the tunnels shifted, creating new paths that hadn't been there moments before. The girl turned and walked toward one of the tunnels, her small figure quickly swallowed by the shadows. "Wait!" Sergei called, but she didn't stop. Against his better judgment, he followed her, the cold growing more intense with each step. The walls of the tunnel were covered in strange glowing inscriptions, the same symbols he had seen on the platform earlier. They seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. The tunnel led to another platform, identical to the one he had just left. Same flickering lights, same scattered belongings. Sergei's stomach dropped. He had been here before. A low chuckle echoed through the station. "You see now?" the voice said, surrounding him. "The metro doesn't lead anywhere. It keeps you." Sergei's head spun as he realized the chilling truth. No matter which path he took, he was trapped in a loop. The sound of a train approaching snapped him from his thoughts. The same rusted ancient train from before screeched into the station, its doors sliding open. This time, the carriages were empty, but faint whispers emanated from within, calling his name. Cliffhanger. A single voice, familiar yet distorted, rose above the others. "Come aboard, Sergei. Your journey is far from over." Sergei hesitated at the edge of the platform, staring into the train's dimly lit interior. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, calling his name like a chant. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put, but the air around him seemed to thicken, pulling him toward the open doors. "Step aboard," the familiar, distorted voice urged. He finally stepped onto the train, the doors hissing shut behind him. The moment they closed, the temperature plummeted, and Sergei's breath fogged in the frigid air. The lights flickered, revealing the same rows of empty seats and cracked windows. But something felt wrong. The train jolted forward, its speed unnaturally fast. Sergei stumbled and grabbed a pole for balance as the windows outside displayed not tunnels, but a swirling, endless void. Time itself seemed to bend, flashes of past and future Moscow appearing and vanishing in an instant. Sergei moved cautiously through the carriages, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. He stopped when he reached a seat with something carved into the metal. Sergei Antonov, passenger number 238. His blood ran cold. That was his full name. Before he could process it, the lights flickered again, and he found himself face to face with his doppelganger from before. This time, the older version of himself looked worn and defeated, his eyes sunken and lifeless.
"You've seen where this ends," the doppelganger said, his voice low and broken. "The metro takes everything. Your time, your memories, your soul. It's already begun." Sergei clenched his fists. "Number, there has to be a way out." The older Sergei shook his head slowly. "There's only one way to break the cycle. The Watcher controls the metro. Find it, and maybe you'll have a chance." The train screeched to a halt, and the doppelganger vanished. The doors opened to reveal a platform unlike the others, a dark, cavernous space with a towering, hooded figure standing at its center. Its presence exuded pure dread. Cliffhanger. The Watcher's hollow eyes turned toward Sergei as a deep, resonant voice echoed through the station. "You've come to face me, but will you survive the truth?" Sergei stepped off the train, the ground beneath him cold and unyielding. The Watcher stood motionless in the center of the cavern, its towering form cloaked in shadow, its hollow eyes glowing faintly like dying embers. "Why are you doing this?" Sergei demanded, his voice trembling but defiant. The Watcher's voice echoed, deep and resonant, as though it came from the void itself. "The metro exists between time and space, a labyrinth of regrets, fears, and forgotten souls. You entered willingly, as they all do. Now you must pay the fare." "I didn't choose this," Sergei shouted, his frustration boiling over. The Watcher raised a skeletal hand, and suddenly, Sergei's mind was flooded with images, flashes of his life, moments of hesitation, missed chances, and paths untaken. He saw himself standing on the edge of the Chistya platform, distracted, lost in thought. by one unshakable rule: never enter the Shapkalesa after dusk. The forest had a reputation: whispers that lured travelers off the path, only to vanish without a trace. Those who returned were forever changed, their eyes hollow, their voices echoing with the whispers of the forest. Sasha had heard the tales growing up, warnings passed down like heirlooms, but she had always dismissed them as superstitions, designed to keep children in line. Now, years later, she found herself walking that very path. Her flashlight cut through the dense fog, revealing gnarled trees that seemed to twist toward her like skeletal hands. She was searching for her younger brother, Ivan, who had disappeared the day before. His friends swore he had gone into the forest on a dare and never came back. Sasha's heart raced as she ventured deeper, the cold, damp air stinging her lungs. She followed the faint trail of Ivan's footprints, barely visible in the soft earth. The deeper she went, the quieter it became. No rustling leaves, no distant animal calls, only an oppressive silence that made monstrous figure's grin widened, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Your brother chose the path. Now he belongs to the forest. No! Sasha grabbed the flashlight and swung it at the creature, the metal striking its face with a sickening crack. It let out an unearthly shriek, recoiling long enough for her to rush toward the altar. She reached for the tattered fabric, her hands shaking as she pulled it back. Beneath lay a small, frail figure, her brother, pale and barely breathing. His lips moved weakly, whispering her name. I'm here, Ivan, she sobbed, trying to lift him. But as she did, the altar began to sink deeper into the pit, the glowing symbols pulsing faster. You cannot take him, the monstrous figure roared, its voice shaking the trees. The forest demands a soul. Sasha's mind raced. She remembered the old stories, the warnings in her grandmother's journal. The forest always takes one, but it will accept a trade. I'll do it, she whispered, her voice shaking. Take me instead. The whispers immediately fell silent, the forest holding its breath. The creature stopped, its hollow eyes narrowing as it leaned closer. Cliffhanger. The altar stopped sinking, and the creature hissed. Then prove your worth. The ground beneath Sasha cracked open, pulling her into darkness. Sasha tumbled into the darkness, the cold air whipping around her as she fell. She landed hard on a moss-covered floor, her flashlight flickering before dying completely. She was engulfed in total blackness, the silence so deep it felt like a physical weight pressing against her ears.
A low, guttural voice echoed from the void. The forest tests those who dare bargain. Show your resolve or be consumed. Suddenly, the darkness shifted, and a dim, greenish glow illuminated the space. Sasha found herself in a labyrinth of twisted roots and stone, the walls pulsating like they were alive. The whispers returned, louder now, their voices intertwining into incomprehensible murmurs. Ahead, a path split into 3 tunnels, each more foreboding than the last. On the walls beside each entrance were carved symbols similar to those on the altar. Sasha knelt to examine them, her fingers tracing the grooves. One symbol began to glow faintly, and a whisper slithered into her mind. Follow the path of truth, or lose what you seek. She chose the tunnel beneath the glowing symbol, gripping the flashlight tightly even though it no longer worked. The walls seemed to close in around her as she walked, the whispers growing more insistent. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber filled with shadowy figures, their forms flickering like dying flames. At the center stood a large, gnarled tree, its bark carved with dozens of faces, some twisted in agony, others frozen in eerie calm. From the base of the tree, a voice called out, soft and broken. Sasha! It was Ivan's voice. She ran toward the tree, but the shadows surged forward, blocking her path. Their hollow eyes locked onto her, and one reached out, its fingers like smoke, brushing against her arm. Pain shot through her body as frost spread across her skin. You cannot save him, one of the shadows hissed. The forest does not forgive. Sasha clenched her fists, ignoring the pain. I won't leave him, she shouted, her voice echoing through the chamber. Cliffhanger. The faces on the tree shifted, their mouths opening in unison to scream as the ground began to quake. A hollow voice boomed, then face your truth and let the forest judge you. The chamber trembled, and Sasha struggled to stay on her feet as the shadowy figures closed in. Their whispers became deafening, forming a sinister chant that reverberated through the hollow space. The gnarled tree in the center groaned, its twisted bark splitting open to reveal a hollow core, glowing with an eerie green light. From its depths, a figure emerged, a woman, her form composed of vines and decayed wood, her eyes burning like embers. The keeper of the forest, Sasha whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising whispers. The keeper's voice was soft, yet commanding, layered with countless voices. You seek to trade your soul for the boys, but the forest demands more than words. It demands truth. Sasha's hands trembled as the shadows encircled her, their smoky fingers tightening around her wrists. The keeper extended a hand, and Sasha was flooded with visions, moments from her life she had buried deep, her darkest fears, her regrets. She saw herself as a child, standing at the edge of the forest, watching watching Ivan fall behind as she ran ahead. His cries for help echoed, but she never turned back. She saw herself again, older, ignoring Ivan's pleas for attention as she focused on her own life. "You've always left him behind," the keeper said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "The forest does not take lightly to broken bonds." Tears streamed down Sasha's face. "I was scared. I didn't know how to protect him, but I'm here now. I'll do whatever it takes." The keeper's eyes narrowed. "Then prove it. Face the shadow of betrayal." The ground beneath Sasha cracked, and from the fissures rose a towering, grotesque figure, a twisted amalgamation of her own face and Ivan's, its hollow eyes burning with rage. It let out a guttural roar and lunged at her. Sasha barely dodged, her body trembling as she scrambled for the altar at the tree's base. The keeper's voice echoed, "Only by conquering your fear can you break the curse." Cliffhanger. The shadow loomed over her, its clawed hand raised to strike, as the forest whispered, "Choose wisely, or both souls will be lost forever." The shadow lunged, its massive claws slicing through the air. Sasha dove to the side, her body scraping against the jagged roots protruding from the ground. The whispers grew louder, mocking her, their voices like needles piercing her mind. "Coward!" the voices taunted. "You always run." The shadow turned, its grotesque form towering over her. Its hollow eyes seemed to pull her in, forcing her to relive every moment she had failed Ivan, every time she had left him behind. The weight of her guilt was suffocating, and her knees buckled under the pressure. "You can't save him," the shadow growled, its voice an eerie blend of hers and Ivan's. "You never could." Sasha clenched her fists, her breath ragged. "I won't run this time," she shouted, her voice cutting through the whispers. The shadow lunged again, but this time Sasha didn't move. She stood her ground, her voice steady. "I failed you, Ivan," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I wasn't there when you needed me, but I'm here now, and I won't abandon you again." The shadow hesitated, its form flickering. Sasha stepped closer, her voice unwavering. "You don't control me. I'm not afraid of my mistakes anymore." The shadow let out an ear-piercing shriek, its body writhing as the green light from the tree began to pierce through its form. Sasha felt a surge of warmth as the frost on her skin melted away, replaced by a growing strength. She reached out, her hand brushing against the shadow's chest. It recoiled, its form dissolving into tendrils of smoke. The whispers faltered, their taunting turning to cries of anguish as the shadow was pulled back into the tree. The keeper watched, her eyes glowing brighter. "You have faced your fear, but the forest price must still be paid." Cliffhanger. The keeper raised her hand, and Ivan's frail body began to fade into the tree's roots. "Choose now, Sasha," the keeper said. "Will you take his place?" Sasha's breath caught as she watched Ivan's body sink deeper into the gnarled roots of the tree. His eyes fluttered open briefly, meeting hers with a flicker of recognition. "Sasha," he whispered, his voice fragile and weak. The keeper's voice resonated through the chamber. "One soul must stay to balance the forest. Will you give yourself, or let the boy remain?" Sasha's heart pounded. Every instinct told her to save herself, to run, but she couldn't. Not this time. She stepped forward, her voice steady. "Take me. Let him go." The keeper's burning eyes narrowed, and the shadows around Sasha writhed as if protesting her choice. "You understand what this means?" the keeper asked. Sasha nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He deserves a life. I've made my choice." The tree's roots loosened their grip on Ivan, lifting his body gently and placing him on the ground beside the altar. The glow from the symbols began to fade, and the whispers softened into a mournful hum. As Sasha approached the tree, the keeper extended a hand, and Sasha felt a cold, ancient power wrapping around her. The frost mark from earlier flared, spreading across her body like icy veins. "Your sacrifice is accepted," the keeper said. "The forest will remember." Ivan stirred, his breath steadying as warmth returned to his pale skin. "Sasha?" he called weakly, his voice filled with confusion. She knelt beside him, brushing a hand over his face. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice soft but resolute. The forest began to shift and tremble, the chamber dissolving into a blur of light and shadows. Ivan reached out for her, but the roots of the tree coiled around Sasha's legs, pulling her toward the hollow Be strong. With one final pull, the tree claimed her, its bark sealing shut, leaving no trace of her presence. Epilogue. Ivan woke outside the forest, the morning sun warming his face. The villagers found him and celebrated his return, but he remained silent. In the distance, the forest loomed, its whispers faint but ever present, and deep within the shop Galisa, a new face had joined the tree, its hollow eyes watching over the forest, ensuring the cycle continued. The icy waters of Lake Baikal stretched endlessly before Artyom, its surface shimmering under the pale moonlight. He stood on the frozen shore, clutching an old yellowed map he had found in his late grandfather's belongings. The map marked a specific spot on the lake, circled in red ink, with one cryptic word scrawled beneath it: Zov, the call. Growing up, Artyom had heard the legends of Baikal. Locals spoke in hushed tones of strange lights beneath the water, and the Zhivitani, living shadows that walked the frozen surface at night. His grandfather, a fisherman, had often warned him. The lake has secrets, Artyom. It takes those who stray too far. But the promise of uncovering his grandfather's mystery proved too tempting. Artyom gathered his gear and set out alone, determined to reach the marked spot. As he trekked across the frozen expanse, the biting wind howled around him, carrying faint, melodic whispers that seemed to rise from the depths below. At first, he dismissed the whispers as tricks of the wind, but the closer he got to the red circle on the map, the louder they grew, forming faint, unintelligible words. Finally, he arrived. The ice beneath him was clear, revealing dark, unfathomable waters below. His heart raced as he saw something moving under the surface, faint, shifting shadows that seemed to spiral upward. Suddenly, the ice groaned loudly, a sharp crack splitting the air. Artyom stumbled back as a small fissure appeared, spreading quickly toward him. He knelt down, peering into the crack, and froze. A face stared back at him from beneath the ice, pale, with hollow black eyes and a mouth that moved in silent screams. Cliffhanger. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, and the frozen face slowly turned its gaze toward him, mouthing one chilling word: Zuv. Artyom scrambled back, his breath clouding the frigid air as the pale face beneath the ice followed his movements. Its hollow eyes locked onto him, its mouth continuing to silently form the word Zov. The whispers grew louder, no longer faint but a cacophony of overlapping voices, urging him to stay, to listen. The fissure widened with a sharp crack, sending spiderweb-like fractures across the frozen surface. The shadows beneath the ice stirred violently, forming ghostly humanoid shapes that seemed to rise closer with each passing second. Get a grip, Artyom muttered to himself, shaking off his fear. He fumbled with his flashlight, aiming it at the ice. The beam flickered, its weak light barely illuminating the shifting shadows. For a moment, he thought he saw something, an ancient ornate structure deep below, like the ruins of a forgotten civilization. Then, the ice groaned again, and a sudden blast of cold wind nearly knocked him off his feet. From the fissure, a thin stream of water seeped up, pooling at his boots. The water was unnaturally warm, steaming in the sub-zero temperature, and it smelled faintly of decay. Artyom's instinct screamed at him to run, but his curiosity anchored him in place. He knelt cautiously by the fissure, staring into the dark water. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the ice, and the shadows below began to coalesce into a single, towering figure. A deep, guttural voice broke through the whispers, speaking in a language he couldn't understand. The ice beneath him trembled violently, and the fissure expanded, revealing a black, endless void below. Suddenly, something broke the surface. A hand, pale and clawed. Gripping the edge of the fissure, Artyom froze, paralyzed by terror, as the figure began to pull itself upward, its skeletal form cloaked in writhing tendrils of shadow. Cliffhanger, the creature's eyeless face tilted toward Artyom, and in a voice that rattled his bones, it rasped, "You answered the call." Artyom stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest as the creature emerged fully from the fissure. Its skeletal frame glistened with frost, and dark tendrils coiled around it like living shadows. Despite its lack of eyes, Artyom could feel its gaze piercing into him, cold and unrelenting. The whispers swirled into words, clear and sinister. The lake keeps its own. The creature's hand stretched toward him, its claws gleaming like shards of ice. Artyom turned and ran, his boots slipping on the treacherous surface. He didn't look back, but he could hear the ice cracking behind him, the sound of pursuit growing louder with every step. Ahead, faint lights shimmered in the fog, too dim to be the shore, but a glimmer of hope nonetheless. Desperate, he sprinted toward them, the whispers morphing into eerie laughter that echoed across the frozen expanse. The lights resolved into what appeared to be an abandoned fishing outpost. Its wooden beams were weathered and coated in frost, the small windows shattered. Artyom burst inside, slamming the door shut behind him. The air was bitterly cold, the walls creaking as though the building itself resisted his presence. He turned to the window, expecting to see the creature, but the ice outside was still, as though nothing had happened. His breath came in shallow gasps, and his body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the unshakable feeling that he wasn't alone. A faint sound drew his attention, a rhythmic dripping, like water falling from the ceiling. Artyom raised his flashlight, its beam illuminating a corner of the room. There, a figure slumped in the shadows, its back to him. "Hello?" Artyom called, his voice barely a whisper. The figure shifted slightly, its head turning at an unnatural angle to reveal a face he recognized. It was his grandfather, pale and gaunt, his eyes sunken and lifeless. "Grandpa?" Artyom gasped, taking a hesitant step forward. The figure's mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, and a guttural voice that wasn't his grandfather's escaped. "You cannot escape the Keeper. Cliffhanger." The window shattered as the whispers surged back, and the creature's shadow loomed large against the frost-covered walls. The icy wind blasted through the shattered windows, extinguishing the weak light inside the outpost. Artyom stumbled backward as his flashlight flickered, its faint beam barely illuminating the shadow that loomed ever closer. His grandfather's twisted form convulsed, dark veins spreading across his pale skin as the voice spoke again, deeper and more guttural. "The Keeper watches. The dead must be paid." Artyom gripped the flashlight like a weapon, his knuckles white. "What dead? What do you want from me?" The figure's hollow eyes fixed on him, unblinking. "Your bloodline answered the call long ago. Now, the lake demands its price." Suddenly, the floor beneath Artyom groaned, and ice began to spread from the fissures, creeping toward him like a living thing. He tried to move, but his boots felt rooted to the spot. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of brine and decay. "You're lying," Artyom said, his voice shaking. "This has nothing to do with me." The whispers swirled angrily, their tone rising. "Your grandfather sought the secrets of the lake. He unleashed the Keeper. Now, his burden is yours." Images flooded Artyom's mind. Visions of his grandfather standing at the same fissure, his face filled with fear as shadows pulled him under. He saw rituals performed on the ice, strange symbols carved into the frozen surface. "No," Artyom whispered, clutching his head. "This can't be real." The figure moved closer, its skeletal hand reaching out. Break the curse, or join the lake's forgotten. A sudden jolt of clarity shot through Artyom. He remembered the map and the journal he had found with it. His grandfather had written about a way to banish the Keeper. A pact must be severed by fire. But how could he light a fire in this frozen wasteland? The fissure cracked wider, and the Keeper began to rise, its tendrils wrapping around the outpost. Artyom's flashlight dimmed, but just before it died, he saw an old oil lamp hanging on the wall. Cliffhanger, the Keeper's voice rumbled like thunder. "Choose, mortal, flee and be hunted, or face the lake's wrath." Artyom lunged for the oil lamp, his fingers trembling as he pulled it from the wall. The Keeper's tendrils slithered through the shattered windows, coiling around the beams and creeping closer. The whispers rose into a chaotic symphony, each voice urging him to give in, to surrender. "You cannot fight the lake," the Keeper intoned, its skeletal form towering over him. "The frost consumes all." Ignoring the dread clawing at his chest, Artyom rummaged through the cabin, his eyes darting between the shadows and the lamp. He found a rusted metal can near the door, kerosene. His breath fogged the air as he poured the fuel into the lamp, the liquid sloshing like a defiant heartbeat in the silent cabin. The Keeper's tendrils struck, wrapping around his legs and dragging him toward the fissure that had now spread into a gaping hole in the center of the floor. Artyom gritted his teeth, striking the flint on the side of the lamp again and again. The spark caught, and a small flame flickered to life, casting long shadows on the frost-covered walls. The moment the light touched the keeper, it recoiled with a deafening shriek, its tendrils retreating like wounded animals. Artyom staggered to his feet, holding the lamp aloft as its golden glow cut through the darkness. The whispers faltered, their once commanding tone now tinged with fear. "You think fire will save you?" The keeper roared, its hollow eyes blazing. "The lake's curse cannot be undone by mortal hands." But Artyom wasn't listening. He remembered the symbols carved into the ice, the ritual his grandfather had described. The fire was only the first step. He needed to burn the mark into the fissure, severing the keeper's connection to the lake. He stepped toward the fissure, the lamp's flame dancing wildly in the icy wind. The shadows writhed violently, and the keeper lunged, its clawed hand swiping at him. Cliffhanger. Just as Artyom lowered the flame toward the ice, the fissure erupted, and a massive shadowy figure burst forth, roaring. "You will not break the chain!" The shadowy figure erupted from the fissure, towering over Artyom like a living storm. Its massive form pulsed with darkness, tendrils of shadow thrashing wildly as the whispers surged into a deafening roar. "You dare defy the lake's will!" the keeper bellowed, its voice shaking the entire outpost. The frost on the walls splintered and fell, and the air became so cold it burned Artyom's lungs with every breath. Gritting his teeth, Artyom held the lamp steady, the flickering flame casting fleeting warmth across his frozen fingers. "This ends now," he growled, lowering the flame toward the fissure. The moment the flame touched the ice, a brilliant flash erupted, and the ancient symbols carved into the surface flared to life. The keeper let out a guttural scream, its tendrils recoiling violently as cracks spread outward from the fissure. "Fool!" the keeper snarled, its skeletal face twisting in rage. "You will only awaken what lies beneath." Artyom's heart pounded as he felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. The ice groaned and split, revealing not just dark water, but what appeared to be massive ancient ruins submerged beneath the lake. Towers of stone, carved with intricate and eerie designs, rose from the depths, their surfaces glowing faintly in the firelight. The whispers shifted, now pleading and desperate. "Turn back. Leave the lake. The chain must hold." But Artyom couldn't stop. He dragged the lamp along the fissure, tracing the glowing symbols as they burned brighter with each pass. The keeper roared in agony, its form distorting as it clawed at the air. "You think you are freeing yourself?" the keeper hissed, its voice fractured and raw. "The lake's curse is eternal. You merely take my place." Artyom faltered, the weight of those words sinking in. Was he breaking the curse or binding himself to it? Cliffhanger. The ruins beneath the ice began to rise, and a deep, otherworldly voice echoed from below. "Release me, and you shall know true despair." The ancient ruins groaned as they pushed upward, cracking through the ice like jagged teeth breaking the surface. Artyom stumbled, his lamp flickering dangerously as the ground beneath him trembled. The keeper's distorted form writhed in agony, its hollow eyes flaring brighter with each passing second. "You will regret this," the keeper roared, its tendrils clawing at the rising towers. "The lake keeps its promises." From the depths of the ruins, the deep, otherworldly voice echoed again, sending a chilling vibration through the frozen air. "You have awakened me!" Artyom's mind raced. He knew he was close to severing the curse, but the sight of the colossal ruins and the voice beneath filled him with dread. Was this truly the path to freedom, or had he unleashed something far worse? With trembling hands, he traced the last glowing symbol along the fissure, the flame from the lamp growing weaker as the kerosene began to run out. The moment the symbol was complete, the fissure erupted in a blinding light, and the keeper let out a final, soul-piercing scream. Its shadowy form dissolved, sucked back into the ice as the fissure began to close. The ruins shuddered, their ascent halted, but the voice below remained. "You cannot escape the lake's will, mortal," it boomed. "The chain is broken, but the debt is not repaid." The ice beneath Artyom cracked violently, and he felt himself falling. The lamp slipped from his grasp, its flame extinguished as he plunged into the freezing water below. Darkness enveloped him, the cold biting into his skin like thousands of needles. He struggled to swim, but the current dragged him deeper, pulling him toward the ruins. His vision blurred, and the last thing he saw was a massive glowing eye opening beneath the lake, its gaze locking onto him. Epilogue. Artyom awoke on the shore, gasping for air. The sun was rising, casting a golden glow over the calm surface of Lake Baikal. His clothes were soaked, and his body ached, but he was alive. As he staggered to his feet, he noticed something etched into his palm, a glowing mark, identical to the symbols on the fissure. The whispers had faded, but a faint voice lingered in the back of his mind.